the last video we talked about how the Russian Mafia basically came about. Today I will talk about how it began to penetrate the USA and how it all ended. When Vyacheslav Ivankov, a famous Russian gangster, or as we know earlier Yaponchik, got out of prison using false documents, he first went to Germany and from there to the USA. In the USA, Yaponchik had a new life and new opportunities. To begin with, he settled in Brighton Beach. Yaponchik established and organized the work of the Russian Mafia in the United States and in the entire region. The feds, for example, called Vyacheslav Ivankov the godfather of the Russian Mafia, which is quite strange, because he was not the first mafioso who was engaged in expanding the activities of gangsters in the USA. There were many such people before him. In 1995, Yaponchik decided to embezzle money from two Russian businessmen who worked in the USA. Their names were Alexander Volkov and Vladimir Voloshin. The money supposedly did not belong to them, and therefore Ivankov, as a decent arbiter of justice, decided to return it back to Russia, directly to the accounts of a shell bank. It was about $3.5 million. Volkov and Voloshin earned that money when the shares of Summit International Corporation fell. He invited the two men to a restaurant conversation and made it clear: either they pay the money and have peace of mind with the opportunity to continue working in the United States, or they will simply shoot both of them. Nevertheless, the Russian businessmen tried to resolve the situation differently. Both keep the money and attack Yaponchik. They turned to the FBI. Ivankov was detained, and given the testimony and the rest of the evidence, he was sentenced to almost 10 years behind bars. They could have thrown more, but they could not understand what he was at all. Now we can talk about how it happened that the Russian Mafia ended up in the USA. It all started with the USSR in the 70s. It was then that the Kremlin allowed Jews to leave the country and go to Israel. This event was the beginning of the formation of the Russian Mafia in the USA. Most of the newcomers ended up in Brighton Beach, where they started small business activities from the mid-70s. Evsei Agron appears on the horizon. He was born in the USSR to a Jewish family, and, to put it mildly, his life was pretty shaky. He was in prison 3 times. Evsei began to form his gang. The main source of income, like all gangs, is racketeering. The members of his group never negotiated. Their victims had to either agree to cooperate and live under constant control or die. Agron gave no other option. Soviet gangs were doing their own thing, and the Italians were paid a percentage. This was a permit to work in areas controlled by the Italian-American Mafia. With this cover, Agron tried to squeeze money out of everything he could reach. Evsei's reliable ally Boris Nayfeld from Leningrad, with the help of Biba, traveled to the United States in the 70s and at first was Agron's bodyguard and personal driver. But over time he began to collect debts, kill for his boss and do various dirty work. In return, Agron allowed him to do business himself. In 1980, while walking in the park, Agron was shot by an unknown person who fired 4 bullets. He was taken to the hospital and saved, and while he was lying down he was guarded by members of the Italian Mafia. They did not want to lose such an important partner. In 1984, history repeated itself. He was shot again in an elevator. The killer fired 2 bullets into the neck and face. Evsei survived again, although half of his face was paralyzed. Only later did it become clear that Agron was being hunted by another influential Russian, Boris Goldberg. And yet, an unknown person walked past all the security guards and shot him dead, 2 bullets into the head. Italians have businesses and people all over the United States. In this case, it's about the gasoline business. Huge multi-million-dollar scams that allowed them to fool the American government and pocket $500 million a year in the 80s. After Leningrad's guy passed away, the vacant boss position was taken by another mafioso, Marat Balagula. He was no less influential but very petty, for which he eventually paid the price. Nevertheless, he changed the style of running the Russian Mafia. First of all, Balagula decided to take that bodyguard Biba with him. Together they concluded contracts with other Italian families. This also brought the Lucchese family into the fold. This allowed them to almost instantly make themselves known to the whole of New York. The same mafia, but with a new leader, was completely different from the criminal groups they had to deal with before. While Balagula was making connections, Boris Nayfeld was doing his usual things: killing, collecting debts, engaging in racketeering, and so on. This tandem worked perfectly and smoothly. The gas stations brought in the most money for the Lucchese family. Marat Balagula was so valuable that when other representatives of the Russian Mafia tried to eliminate him, the Italians cracked down on the entire Russian clan. But the one person he couldn't hide from was law enforcement. Despite the fact that gas stations and the black market brought him tens, if not hundreds, of millions, he was caught in credit card fraud. Balagula was sentenced to 8 years in prison. The sentence was reviewed several times with new charges, but he served his sentence and was released from prison in 2004. While he was in prison, Boris Nayfeld, or Biba, took his place. And during his reign, the Russian Mafia turned upside down. It was thanks to Nayfeld that the FBI began to dig deeper into the Russians. It all started with the fact that Biba lost control of the gasoline fraud, and then things took off. He was attracted by heroin, and from being a gasoline king, he wanted to become a heroin king. He bought goods in Singapore and brought them to the USA through Poland in TV cases and boxes. This brought $2 million a month, but he was not destined to work like that for long. He was also imprisoned. Vyacheslav Ivankov, or Yaponchik, took control of the Russian Mafia in the USA. At that time, in 1992, he just fled to the USA, but now we are not talking about him. There was another interesting moment in the history of the Russian Mafia. The end of the 90s was actually the end of the Russian Mafia, especially abroad. It was no longer possible to work openly. Once multi-million-dollar turnovers turned into gambling control, and some black market operations remained. Law enforcement officers began to be more careful with citizens arriving from Russia, checking everyone because the members of the Russian Mafia were doctors, economists, businessmen and engineers. However, this did not prevent them from staying more or less afloat. From time to time they made themselves felt. Now the feds are worried that Russian organized crime has too many connections, but sits in the shadows. And if the situation in Russia gets out of control, the Mafia may get access to nuclear weapons. And they do not really need them. The feds are afraid that the Mafia will sell all that good to third countries, and the situation will become uncontrolled. It is difficult to say how realistic this scenario is, given how strict the control over Russian nuclear weapons is, but it is better to be prepared for any scenario. In general, a Russian gangster is an integral part of the culture of a huge ocean called the Russian Federation. Russia and its organized crime are like fish, and fish, as you know, rot from the head down. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Give it a thumbs up, comment, share this video and be sure to subscribe to the channel to help it develop.